Imagine you are the CEO of the most powerful, legally protected monopoly on Earth.
Right.
Your company controls the trade of a quarter of the global population.
A massive scale.
Yeah, and your business model is completely flawless. It's backed by the highest laws in the land.
You'd feel pretty secure.
Exactly. But then tomorrow, you could be wiped out entirely.
Just gone.
And not because a competitor built a better product, right?
Seriously?
Or because your supply chain collapsed.
No, of course not.
You get wiped out because the very government that protects you simply ran out of cash. So they decided to sell your legal rights to the highest bidder.
It is a terrifying scenario for any business owner to consider. But it's exactly the reality of early corporate capitalism.
Which is wild.
We operate today under this assumption that monopolies die because the market eventually rejects them.
Right, like antitrust laws break them up.
Yeah, or some scrappy startup disrupts them. But the historical reality, the absolute counterintuitive truth here, is that the survival of the world's first mega corporations had almost nothing to do with commercial logic.
That completely shatters how we are taught to view the free market.
It really does.
So today, we are pulling insights from some incredible research by Dan Bogart. He's an economic history professor out of UC Irvine.
He does some fascinating work.
He really does. He dug deep into the archives of the English East India Company, and the goal was to figure out how these massive monopolies actually operated from the year 1600 all the way to 1813.
And what he found is, frankly, a total slap in the face to conventional wisdom.
Oh, absolutely. The mission of our deep dive today is to explore how modern free markets weren't born from some grand democratic ideal.
Right, or like a philosophical love of liberty.
Exactly. They were born, quite literally, from a government simply figuring out how to borrow money more efficiently.
That is the core thesis, and it is a stunning realization when you trace the history.
So if you're listening to this and you run a business, you probably think you operate in a relatively stable system, right? Like you have property rights and open competition.
Sure, that's the modern assumption.
But the rules of the game you play by today, they were forged through centuries of state-sponsored extortion, raw partisan bribery, and literal daylight robbery by the state.
The East India Company wasn't really a business in the modern sense. I mean, it was a political piggy bank.
Let's get right into the mechanics of that, because to understand how a massive behemoth like the East India Company functions, we have to look at the system.
The completely alien economic system it was born into back in the 17th century.
Right. The paper calls it a limited access order.
Yes, a limited access order.
I want to pause here because that sounds like dry academic jargon, but the actual physical reality of this concept is fascinating. What exactly is a limited access order?
Well, to grasp it, you have to ask a foundational question about human history. Why did most civilizations stay poor for thousands of years?
Oh, wow. That's a big question.
It is. Why was economic growth basically flatline for the average person until the Industrial Revolution?
Okay, so what's the answer?
The framework Bogart uses suggests that elites intentionally and systematically limit market entry.
Wait, they kept people poor on purpose?
They deliberately engineer the economy so that it is not free.
Because a genuinely free market means unpredictable competition. And unpredictable competition threatens the people who already hold power.
Exactly.
Like if I'm a peasant who suddenly invents a better loom and I get incredibly wealthy, I might start demanding political power.
And the elites just can't have that. Precisely the underlying logic.
So how does it physically work?
In a limited access order, the ruling coalition, which in 17th century England was the monarch, the high nobility, and some powerful merchants, they literally restrict who is allowed to participate in high-value markets.
So they grant exclusive monopolies to specific individuals or syndicates.
Right. By legally banning anyone else from trading, they create artificial scarcity. And artificial scarcity generates massive, guaranteed excess profits.
Economists call those rents, right?
They do. Rents.
I want to make sure I have the mechanics of this right. Let's use an analogy. It sounds like the bouncer at an incredibly exclusive high-end nightclub.
Oh, I like that.
So the bouncer, who is the king, puts up a velvet rope. He only lets a few VIP merchants inside to sell drinks.
Okay, yeah.
Because there's no one else selling drinks inside, the VIPs can charge $1,000 for a glass of water.
Because there's no competition.
Right. But the catch is the VIPs have to give the bouncer half of everything they make. Otherwise, he kicks them out and lets someone else in.
That is a brilliant way to visualize it. The monopoly wasn't created to be economically efficient.
It wasn't about delivering the finest spices to the average Londoner at the lowest possible price?
Not at all. The monopoly was a tool for political survival.
Ah, to keep the regime in power.
Yes. The ruler uses those massive monopoly profits, the cut he takes from the VIPs, to pay off the rest of the elite class.
So you distribute these economic privileges to the nobles and the generals.
So they have a financial incentive to support your regime, rather than starting a civil war to overthrow you.
You are essentially buying peace.
Exactly. You buy peace.
It's essentially a mafia protection racket running a sovereign nation.
It really is.
And Bogart's paper points out that the East India Company wasn't some unique anomaly in this regard. Between 1555 and 1640, there were 28 different chartered companies in England operating on this exact same mafia logic.
Yes, 28 companies, each granted specific monopolies over different foreign trade routes.
Like the Muscovy Company for Russia.
Right, or the Levant Company for the Mediterranean, and so on. The monarch had complete, unchecked authority to regulate foreign trade.
And they loved this structure, didn't they?
They absolutely loved it for two practical reasons. First, it allowed them to allocate lucrative privileges to their political allies.
And second,
It was incredibly easy to tax.
of course,
The state bureaucracy in 1600 was tiny. They couldn't audit thousands of independent merchants.
but they could easily just station a few tax collectors at the docks in London.
Exactly. Just wait at the docks for the designated monopoly ships to arrive.
Which brings us to the birth of the biggest one of them all. On the very last day of the year 1600, Queen Elizabeth I grants a royal charter to the East India Company.
The big one.
It gives them a legal monopoly over all trade and traffic from the Cape of Good Hope all the way to the Straits of Magellan.
That is a staggering chunk of the planet.
Right. But what I find so revealing is when you look at who was actually put in charge of this supposed business.
Yeah, this is key.
The first governor wasn't an explorer. He wasn't a scrappy sea captain who knew the trade routes. It was a guy named Thomas Smythe.
Thomas Smythe is the ultimate embodiment of a crony capitalist.
Totally.
To understand the early East India Company, you have to understand Smythe. He was intimately connected to the Crown's finances.
His father had literally designed improvements for Elizabethan customs collection.
Right, and Smythe himself was a royal trade commissioner. He was a purveyor for the Queen's troops in Ireland.
And later, under King James I, he became a receiver for the Duchy of Cornwall and a special ambassador to Russia.
So he is the ultimate insider.
He is literally the Queen's tax collector. And now he's been handed the keys to the biggest private monopoly in the world.
It proves the point perfectly. You don't get the monopoly because you are the best merchant.
You get the monopoly because you are the most useful to the Crown's political coalition.
Exactly. And for a brief moment, the logic of the limited access order works perfectly for everyone involved.
Everyone gets paid.
The Crown gets reliable tax revenue and a loyal elite supporter. Smythe and his investors get to charge astronomical prices for pepper, cloves, and nutmeg.
Because no English competitor is legally allowed to sail past the Cape of Good Hope.
Right. But here is where we hit the major fatal flaw in this entire system. The counterintuitive twist of this era.
Let me guess. The law strictly forbids competition, but the person who wrote the law is the first one to break it.
You hit the nail on the head.
A total face slap.
It really is. A legal document like a royal charter, complete with the Queen's wax seal, is functionally worthless if the ruler's political coalition shifts.
Or if the ruler simply gets greedy.
Exactly. We see this play out almost immediately. Queen Elizabeth dies, King James I takes the throne, and in 1604, James just casually authorizes a rival group.
Just like that?
Just like that. Led by a man named Sir Edward Muttleborne. He authorizes them to sail ships right into the middle of the East India Company's exclusive territory.
Wait, hold on. This completely violates the charter that was granted just 4 years prior.
Totally violates it.
How does a king justify this? What's the physical reality here? Are Muttleborne's ships just passing the East India Company's ships in the Indian Ocean and waving?
Oh, it was incredibly hostile. Muttleborne basically acted as a state-sanctioned privateer, interrupting established trade networks.
Wow.
And James I didn't feel the need to offer a complex legal justification.
Why did Muttleborne get this special pass?
Because he had the backing of Thomas Sackville, the first Baron of Buckhurst.
Who just so happened to be one of King James's closest advisors.
And his Lord Treasurer. The king needed to reward a different faction of his political coalition, so he just ignored the monopoly he had promised to honor.
Let's go back to our bouncer analogy.
Yeah, let's hear it.
You pay the bouncer to be the only guy selling drinks in the club. But an hour later, the bouncer's cousin shows up with a cooler full of beer.
Yeah.
And the bouncer just lets him in to set up shop right next to you.
Mm.
And you can't complain to the police because the bouncer is the police.
That is exactly the dynamic. And King James wasn't finished.
There's more.
In 1617, he chartered a Scottish East India Company. He exploited a loophole because he was King of Scotland as well as England, bypassing the English seal entirely.
That's sneaky. So what did the English company do?
The English company actually had to pay a massive bribe, essentially a ransom, to buy the license back from the Scottish company just to protect their own turf.
So the kings are just constantly holding the company hostage.
Constantly.
And then we get to Charles I in the 1630s. And things transition from greedy to outright predatory.
Predatory is the right word.
In 1635, Charles I licenses yet another rival syndicate, the Courtine Association.
Yes.
And the king actually takes a stock credit of £10,000 in this rival company.
The conflict of interest is staggering.
He is personally investing in the illegal competition he just authorized against his own chartered monopoly.
And when the East India Company predictably protests this blatant violation of their charter, Charles dismisses them.
What's his excuse?
He essentially argues, you haven't been making enough new discoveries, so your monopoly is void.
That's entirely arbitrary.
Completely arbitrary. And then he escalates. In 1636, he arbitrarily hikes the customs duties on the East India Company's pepper imports by 70%.
70%. I want you listening to really think about the economic math of a sudden 70% tax hike.
It's brutal.
If your business model, your shipping costs, and your payroll are all calibrated to a specific margin, a 70% overnight tax hike on your core product is a death sentence. You are bleeding cash.
It is catastrophic, but Charles I didn't care about their margins.
Why not?
Because his own cash flow problem had just become existential.
So he needed money badly.
Very badly. And if a 70% tax hike sounds bad, it pales in comparison to what happens when the king's financial situation turns desperate.
This brings us to 1641, and an event that completely strips away the illusion of property rights.
Yes, the pepper loan.
The pepper loan. I read this part of the paper 3 times because it sounds like a heist movie, not economic history.
It really does play out like a heist.
Set the stage for us. Why is Charles I so desperate in 1641?
By 1641, Charles is fighting the Bishops' Wars in Scotland, and he is locked in a bitter, toxic stalemate with the English Parliament.
A conflict that is rapidly spiraling toward the English Civil War.
Exactly. He has no money to pay his troops, his credit is ruined, and Parliament absolutely refuses to grant him any new taxes.
So he's broke and stuck.
He needs a massive injection of cash immediately, within days, or his regime collapses.
So he looks around London, and he sees the East India Company's warehouses on Leadenhall Street, packed to the rafters with imported spices.
And he doesn't just tax them.
No. He forcibly borrows their actual physical inventory.
He orders his men-armed agents of the state to roll up to the East India Company's warehouses with horse-drawn carts.
Wow.
They physically break into the inventory and confiscate pepper valued at a staggering £63,283.
Let's make that real for a second. We aren't talking about freezing a bank account with a keystroke or levying a tax on future profits.
No, this is physical theft.
We are talking about the state driving up to a corporate warehouse and loading tons of physical product that took years to source from across the globe, surviving storms and pirates right off the shelves.
It's hard to even imagine today.
What does a company even do in that situation?
They do nothing. They watch it happen.
Insane.
The king framed it as a quote-unquote loan, promising to repay the value of the pepper in 4 installments.
Right?
He then immediately fenced the pepper. He sold it off to other merchants at a massive discount just to get hard cash in his hands that same week.
So he pawned stolen goods.
Basically. But of course, the political situation deteriorated. The English Civil War broke out. Charles was literally beheaded a few years later, and the monarchy was temporarily abolished.
And what happened to the debt? Did the company ever get paid back for the stolen pepper?
Barely. After decades of pleading with various subsequent governments, the East India Company only ever recovered about 1/3 of the value of that pepper.
This completely destroys the myth we tell ourselves about the sanctity of private property in English history.
It does. It really does.
If you had property and the guy with the army was broke, your property was now his property. There was no independent Supreme Court you could appeal to.
That is the raw, terrifying vulnerability of early corporations in a limited access order. When the state holds a monopoly on violence and the state is bankrupt, your inventory is their inventory.
It's just shocking.
It demonstrates a core economic truth. Without the rule of law applying equally to the elites and the sovereign, property rights are an illusion.
A legal charter is just a piece of paper if the state lacks the fiscal capacity to fund itself without resorting to theft.
Exactly.
Okay, so the absolute monarchy is clearly a nightmare for business. You'd think the logical solution would be to get rid of absolute monarchs.
That seems logical.
And if you took a standard Western Civ history class, you are taught that this is exactly what happened and that it was a triumph.
Right, the traditional narrative.
We are taught that the glorious revolution of 1688, where King James II was overthrown, Parliament was empowered, and the monarchy was constitutionally restrained, was this massive leap forward.
It supposedly secured property rights and paved the way for modern capitalism.
But Bogart's paper reveals that for the East India Company, the glorious revolution was an absolute, unmitigated disaster. Why?
Because of the violent nature of regime change in a limited access order. When the regime changes, the old political networks that guaranteed your survival are instantly voided.
Right, because your mafia protection contract was with the old boss.
Right.
The new boss doesn't care about your contract.
Exactly. The East India Company had spent the previous several decades deeply intertwining itself with the restored Stuart monarchs, Charles II and James II.
They were playing the game.
Playing it well. The company's governor at the time, a man named Josiah Child, was a massive vocal royalist supporter. He had built his entire corporate strategy around keeping the king happy.
So when James II is overthrown in 1688 and flees the country, and the newly empowered Parliament takes charge, suddenly the East India Company is caught on the wrong side of history.
They backed the losers.
And I'm guessing the winners want their cut, or they want revenge.
Both. The new Parliament was heavily influenced by the Whig Party. Now, to understand the dynamics here, we need to look at the political factions.
Yes, please clarify this for you listening. We hear Whigs and Tories thrown around in British history, but what did these groups actually represent in the 1690s, and why did it matter so much to a spice trading company?
Broadly speaking, the Tories were the conservative faction. They believed in the strong traditional authority of the monarch.
And the established Church of England.
Right. And they generally supported the old royal monopolies, like the East India Company.
Okay, and the Whigs.
The Whigs were the faction that had engineered the Glorious Revolution. They opposed absolute royal power. They championed the supremacy of Parliament.
And
Crucially, their ranks were filled with the interlopers, the rival merchants and financiers who had been legally shut out of the Asian trade by the old royal charters.
Oh, wow. So the people who spent the last 50 years angry that they couldn't trade in India are suddenly the ones writing the laws in Parliament.
That is a massive conflict of interest.
It was a bloodbath for the company.
A total bloodbath. The Whigs immediately started attacking the East India Company in the House of Commons. They demanded investigations. They demanded the charter be dissolved. They wanted the trade thrown open or handed to their own syndicates.
So how does the company survive this? Do they try to pivot? Do they offer better prices to consumers to win public favor?
No, they don't pivot their business model. They pivot to massive, institutionalized political corruption.
Of course they do.
Bogart's paper outlines how the East India Company had to enter into a frantic, incredibly expensive bribery war.
A bribery war.
Yes. Between 1688 and 1695, parliamentary investigations revealed, and witnesses testified, that the company spent over £200,000 just to lobby members of Parliament and the King's ministers to keep their charter.
£200,000 in the late 17th century. What does a lobbying effort like that actually look like on the ground? Are we talking bags of coins sliding across tavern tables?
Essentially, yes. It was the purchasing of influence through cash gifts, shares of company stock, and lucrative contracts handed out to MPs and their relatives.
Wow.
It was a desperate scramble to buy enough votes to prevent Parliament from legally executing the company. And Bogart provides hard data to show exactly how raw and partisan this warfare was.
There's a fascinating data set in the paper table 1, which breaks down the actions of members of Parliament regarding the East India Company, cross-referenced with their political party affiliation.
Yes, let's look at that.
Let's deep dive into Table 1, because this data proves that the survival of the company had zero to do with their balance sheet and everything to do with pure partisan warfare.
If you look at the parliamentary session from 1690 to 1695, The Tory party, the old allies of the king, managed to hold a slight majority.
Uh,
During this period, if you isolate the MPs who actively spoke, made motions, or voted in favor of the East India Company, 58.8% of them were Tories.
so they were actively acting as a legislative shield for the company.
Yes. Conversely, only 23.8% of the MPs acting against the company were Tories.
So as long as the Tories hold power, the company's bribes are working, and they are relatively safe. But the political winds shift, right?
Drastically. Between 1695 and 1700, the Whig party surges and takes control of the House of Commons and the key ministerial positions.
And the Whigs despise the old royalist monopoly.
Absolutely despise it. Look what happens to the data. Suddenly, the support vanishes. Only 22.6% of Whigs act in favor of the company.
Wow.
But a staggering 61.5% of all anti-company actions in Parliament are driven by Whigs.
If you are listening to this and wondering how a legally binding corporate charter can just be ignored, remember that the rule of law as an impartial force did not exist yet.
It just didn't.
The law was quite literally just who is in your political party. If your party lost the election, your company was marked for death.
And the Whigs didn't just give angry speeches. They took devastating action.
What did they do?
In 1698, the Whig-controlled Parliament legally authorized a rival syndicate, effectively creating a new East India Company specifically designed to destroy the old one.
But this political warfare, as vicious as it was, only set the stage.
Yeah.
The final blow, the specific event that forced King William III to completely break the old monopoly and sell it out to this new Whig syndicate, was, once again, a massive, undeniable financial crisis.
It always comes back to the state needing cash to wage war. We are now in the late 1690s. King William is fighting the 9 Years' War against France.
This is the first truly modern, massive-scale European conflict Britain is engaged in, and it is unspeakably expensive.
The state bureaucracy cannot collect taxes fast enough to pay for the armies and the navy. Bogart pulls out the fiscal data for this period in Table 2, and it looks like the heart monitor of a dying patient.
I'm looking at Table 2 now, which tracks government revenues, expenditures, and deficits. Explain this, because the math here is terrifying for a state.
In 1692, the British government's deficit ratio was 0.04, barely a blip. They are spending roughly what they take in.
Sounds stable.
But as the war with France grinds on, expenditures skyrocket to fund the military, while tax revenues stagnate. By 1696, the deficit ratio is 0.66.
Ain't bad.
And then in 1697, the crisis peaks. The deficit ratio spikes to an unbelievable 1.40.
Wait, let's make that math crystal clear. A deficit ratio of 1.40 means what exactly?
It means that for every £1 the government collected in total revenue, they were spending £2.40.
So their expenditures were 2.4 times their entire income.
That is not just a budget deficit, that is total state bankruptcy. The king's armies are mutinying for lack of pay, the navy can't buy supplies.
King William needs cash immediately. He can't wait for a new land tax to be assessed and collected over a year. He needs a massive lump sum today.
And so he does what any desperate ruler in a limited access order does. He puts the East India monopoly up for auction.
This is the infamous 1697 auction.
Yes. The old East India Company, desperate to secure their charter and fend off the Whig attacks, scrapes together their capital and offers the king a massive loan of £500,000 at 4% interest.
Which is a colossal sum of money for a single corporation to offer in 1697. That should have been more than enough to buy the king's protection.
In a normal peacetime year, it would have been. But remember the interlopers, the rival merchants backed by the Whig party?
They sense blood in the water.
They do. They have formed a massive syndicate, and they know the king is absolutely desperate. So this new company syndicate counters with a staggering, almost unthinkable offer.
What's the offer?
A loan of £2 million at 8% interest on the express condition that they are granted exclusive rights to the Asian trade and the old company is dissolved.
£2 million. That is 4 times what the old company offered. How does a syndicate even raise £2 million in 1697?
By pooling the wealth of hundreds of wealthy Whig merchants, financiers, and political insiders who wanted a piece of the Asian trade.
And King William looks at the old company's $500K, looks at the new company's $2 million, and what does he do?
He takes the bigger bribe.
He doesn't hesitate.
He takes the £2 million. In 1698, an Act of Parliament officially authorizes the formation of the new East India Company, granting them the exclusive trading rights.
And serving the old company, notice that they have 3 years to wind down all their operations and liquidate their assets.
Let me frame this brutally for anyone who has ever built a business.
Hmm.
Imagine you've paid for a premium enterprise software license. You've built your entire company's infrastructure on this software for decades.
Right.
But suddenly, the software developer locks you out of your account, steals your customer data, and sells your exact account access to your biggest competitor, simply because the competitor offered the developer a bigger bribe in a back room.
That is exactly what the British government did to the East India Company. Legal protection was a complete illusion. The law was just a commodity to be optioned.
It proves definitively that in this era, monopoly rights weren't granted by majestic law, nor were they earned by commercial competence.
They were purchased.
And crucially, they were always subject to being re-auctioned whenever the state's deficit ratio spiked.
If the state's deficit hadn't hit 1.4 in 1697, the old company's £500,000 offer might have been accepted, and history changes.
But desperation breeds extortion.
So the old company is dead. They just pack up their ships and go home.
Not quite. The old company was incredibly stubborn, and they still had vast assets in India, forts, warehouses, treaties with local rulers.
Right, they had roots.
They engaged in a brutal, decade-long commercial and political war with the new company. It was so destructive to the trade that the government eventually forced the two factions to merge in 1709.
They become the United East India Company.
Yes. But this entire traumatic sequence of events, the pepper robbery by Charles I, the Whig political attacks, the 1697 auction, it taught the newly united company a vital, cynical lesson about surviving in a limited access order.
And what was that lesson? How do you secure your existence when you know for a mathematical fact that the government will sell you out the second they need to fund a war?
You make the government owe you too much to fail.
Right.
You transition from being a merchant who occasionally bribes the state to becoming the state's primary institutional creditor.
Ah, the debt shield. This is where the story turns from victimization to brilliant, terrifying corporate strategy. Walk me through the mechanics of the debt shield.
In 1709, just as the old and new companies finally finalize their merger, Queen Anne is on the throne, and she is facing her own massive fiscal crisis due to the War of the Spanish Succession.
Another war, another crisis.
Like her predecessors, she demands cash. She requires an interest-free loan of £1.2 million from the newly united company just to approve their charter.
Another royal shakedown.
Yes, but this time the company uses the shakedown to build an impenetrable shield.
How so?
By agreeing to this new loan and rolling over previous loans, the total consolidated debt the British government owed to the East India Company ballooned to £3.2 million.
£3.2 million. That is an astronomical figure for the early 18th century. That's a significant percentage of the nation's GDP.
And here is the genius binding clause of this arrangement. The government legally could only cancel the East India Company's monopoly charter if it paid back the entire £3.2 million in full first.
Oh, wow. Wait, I'm stuck on this.
What's that?
If the government is practically a mafia with an army, as we've established, and they owe you £3.2 million,
Yeah.
why don't they just act like a mafia?
Meaning?
Why not just execute the board of directors, declare the debt null and void, and take the monopoly anyway? What stopped Queen Anne or Parliament from just defaulting?
That is a crucial question. The difference now is the rise of the international bond market and sovereign credibility.
Credibility.
If Parliament arbitrarily defaults on a massive, highly public institutional debt, like the one owed to the East India Company, their credit rating goes to zero.
No Dutch banker, no London financier. No one will ever lend the British state a single shilling again.
And in an era of constant European warfare, losing your ability to borrow means your country will be conquered by France.
So the state's own survival depends on maintaining its creditworthiness.
Exactly. The company trapped the government. Since the British state was constantly running deficits to fight wars, there was absolutely zero chance they could ever scrape together £3.2 million in hard cash to pay off the principal of the debt.
Therefore, the monopoly was effectively permanent.
The company had morphed from a mere trading outfit into the state's foundational creditor. The monopoly was collateral for the national debt.
That is a masterclass in leverage.
It really is.
But the company didn't stop there. They knew that laws could always be rewritten, and they knew politicians are fickle.
Very fickle.
To ensure the debt was honored and the shield remained intact, the East India Company decided that lobbying from the outside wasn't enough. They needed to infiltrate the government itself.
They literally hacked the political system from the inside out. We have incredible data on this too, mapped out in Figure 2 of Bogart's paper.
Let's look at Figure 2. How exactly did they infiltrate Parliament? Did they run a grassroots campaign?
Hardly. In the 18th century, the British electoral system was deeply flawed. You had rotten boroughs,
Rotten boroughs, what are those?
districts with only a handful of voters where a wealthy patron could simply buy the parliamentary seat outright.
So just straight up purchasing a seat.
Figure 2 tracks the number of members of parliament who were currently or had previously been directors or governors of the East India Company.
And what does the trend show?
If you look at the period from 1660 to 1750, the trend is undeniable. Before the Glorious Revolution, it's a very small number, maybe 2 or 3. But as the company realizes its survival depends on controlling the legislature, the number spikes dramatically. It peaks in 1712 with over 20 East India Company directors sitting directly in the House of Commons.
Let me process this. To prevent the lawmakers from extorting them, the monopoly directors just bought the lawmaking seats. They literally became the government.
That is precisely the mechanism.
Wow.
It wasn't cheap. Buying a seat in the House of Commons through patronage and localized corruption was an expensive investment, but it was vastly cheaper than being auctioned off to a rival syndicate for £2 million.
Think about the power dynamic. When the directors of the monopoly are the ones sitting in the parliamentary committee rooms, writing the trade laws, and voting on the national budget, the monopoly finally becomes untouchable.
It is the ultimate form of insider trading and regulatory capture. You are the regulator and the regulated simultaneously.
And it worked beautifully for them, didn't it?
It did. The company managed to secure its charter through subsequent renegotiations in 1712, 1730, and 1744.
So more existential threats.
In each of these cycles, there were political squabbles, and the company usually had to offer a bit more money to the treasury or accept a slightly lower interest rate on the massive debt they held. But their core existence, their monopoly, was never truly threatened the way it was in 1697.
They had achieved a perfect symbiotic relationship with the state. The state needed their credit. They needed the state's legal protection.
But then, right in the middle of the 18th century, something fascinating happens.
Run here.
Something that fundamentally alters the DNA of how the state interacts with corporations. Britain goes to war again, the 7 Years' War, from 1756 to 1763.
Now, based on the entire historical pattern we've just discussed, war means a fiscal crisis.
Always.
A fiscal crisis means the government hauls the East India Company into a dark room and shakes them down for another massive forced loan to renew their charter.
That's the established rhythm.
But this time, the government doesn't ask the East India Company for a dime. Why? What changed?
What changed is one of the most crucial turning points in human economic history, the financial revolution.
The financial revolution.
And its impact is vividly illustrated in Figure 3 of Bogart's paper.
Break down Figure 3 for us. What are we looking at?
Figure 3 maps out British government tax revenues and total expenditures in times of peace and war, spanning from 1692 to 1770.
Okay, so tracking the money.
As you trace the lines, you see the massive, jagged spikes in expenditure during the 9 Years' War, the War of Spanish Succession, the War of Austrian Succession.
The expensive wars.
In all those previous wars, the government's revenue line couldn't keep up, creating that massive deficit, which forced them to extort the company.
But then you look at the 7 Years' War.
There is a massive expenditure spike. It was a global war, incredibly costly. But there is no corresponding forced loan extracted from the East India Company or the Bank of England.
How did they pay for armies in North America and India if they didn't rob their traditional corporate piggy banks?
Because the government had invented a vastly superior financial product. The British state successfully created and marketed the 3% consul.
The 3% consul. I've heard this term in historical dramas, but what actually is it?
Consul is short for consolidated annuities. It was a revolutionary financial instrument, a perpetually redeemable government bond that paid a reliable 3% interest rate every single year.
Perpetually redeemable.
Yes. Because the British state had slowly, painstakingly built up its tax collection bureaucracy over the previous decades, especially its customs and excise taxes, and because it had consistently honored its parliamentary debts, the broader public actually trusted it.
I need an analogy for this transition.
It's the difference between a desperate man getting a payday loan from a violent loan shark in an alleyway versus a stable professional taking out a 30-year fixed-rate mortgage from a regulated bank.
Oh, that makes perfect sense.
Instead of the king shaking down one giant corporate monopoly for a single lump sum in a closed-door meeting, the government could now issue these 3% consuls to the general public.
So if I'm a moderately wealthy merchant in London, I can buy a bond, get a totally reliable 3% return on my money forever, and the government instantly gets the liquid cash it needs to fight the French.
Exactly. Thousands of domestic citizens and even international investors in Amsterdam bought these bonds to fund Britain's massive war expenditures.
The government had modernized its fiscal capacity.
It didn't need to behave like a mafia boss anymore because it had built a functional, highly liquid, institutionalized credit market.
This is a huge aha moment for me, and I hope for you listening too. We often think that property rights became secure because society became more civilized, or because politicians read philosopher John Locke and decided to be morally enlightened.
But that's entirely backwards.
Property rights became secure because the government invented a better financial product. State capacity increased, so they simply didn't need to be mobsters anymore. They could finally afford the luxury of adhering to the rule of law.
Precisely. This shift marks the transition to the first doorstep condition in the economic framework for an open society. The rule of law for elites.
Meaning the state is finally bound by the rules.
Because the British state no longer needed emergency corporate shakedowns to survive, the East India Company's property rights became genuinely, legally secure for the first time in its history.
So the midnight robberies are over.
Between 1781 and 1793, the company's charters were fully respected by Parliament. They were only renegotiated when they legally reached their expiration dates. Midnight robberies of pepper warehouses were a thing of the dark past.
That is such a profound paradigm shift.
Yeah.
The law only actually matters when the state is strong enough financially to not have to break it.
That's the sad reality.
So by the late 18th and early 19th century, the East India Company appears to be utterly invincible. They have the £3.2 million debt shield. They have dozens of MPs sitting in Parliament. They are protected by a state that respects the rule of law.
And crucially, they have transitioned from just buying spices to being a territorial sovereign power in India.
Right. They have their own private army that collect taxes in Bengal. They are a literal state within a state.
Unbelievable power.
So, given all this impenetrable armor, how on earth did they finally lose their commercial monopoly in 1813?
To understand the final fall of the monopoly, we have to look at a perfect storm. It wasn't one single factor. It was a violent collision of extreme political vulnerability and massive macroeconomic shifts.
A perfect storm.
And the entire collapse was triggered by a completely unpredictable black swan event.
A black swan event. What happened?
In May 1812, the Prime Minister of Great Britain, Spencer Perceval, was assassinated.
Assassinated in 1812. We don't often hear about British prime ministers being assassinated. Paint the scene for us.
It was shocking. Spencer Perceval was walking through the busy lobby of the House of Commons. A man named John Bellingham, a merchant who was holding a deranged personal grudge against the government over a Russian debt issue, stepped forward.
And what did he do?
He drew a pistol and shot the Prime Minister point blank through the heart. Perceval collapsed and died almost instantly.
That is insane.
It threw the entire British political establishment into utter chaos. Lord Liverpool had to scramble to take over as Prime Minister, and a sudden, completely unexpected general election was called in October 1812 to stabilize the government.
Okay, that's historically dramatic, but why does a random assassination matter so much for the East India Company's business model?
Because the company relied entirely on its carefully cultivated, highly managed political network to defend its monopoly in Parliament.
Oh.
An unexpected snap election is like a catastrophic earthquake for a delicate political machine. You haven't had time to buy the right boroughs or distribute the necessary patronage.
So they were caught off guard.
Completely. The polling data on this is striking. In April 1812, before the assassination, 58% of the MPs affiliated with the East India Company were safely aligned with the ruling government coalition.
They had the majority in their pocket.
But by November, after the shock election, that number plunged to just 28%.
Wow. Their political support completely collapsed overnight. More than half their guys either lost their seats or suddenly found themselves powerless in the minority.
Exactly. The company directors were terrified. One prominent East India Company director actually wrote in his diary about this specific moment, lamenting, "I had no idea we stood on such weak ground. From that moment, I felt myself humbled."
They realized instantly that without their political shield in Parliament, the monopoly was naked and exposed.
Very exposed.
And who was waiting in the wings to attack them? The old interlopers.
Something much bigger than interlopers, the Industrial Revolution.
Oh, right. The machines are turning on.
By 1812, the economic landscape of Britain had fundamentally transformed. You had the massive steam-powered cotton textile mills operating in Manchester. You had a deeply powerful, incredibly wealthy new merchant class operating out of Liverpool.
And they want it in.
These northern industrialists were producing high-quality goods cheaper and faster than anyone in human history, and they desperately wanted access to the vast consumer markets of India to sell their textiles.
They looked at the East India Company's monopoly on shipping and exports and saw it as an archaic, corrupt roadblock to national prosperity.
And because the company just lost its political shield in the election, these northern industrialists see their opening. They start lobbying.
Heavily.
Extremely heavily. They organized a massive grassroots and elite pressure campaign. At one point, 130 separate petitions from manufacturing towns across Britain were sent to Parliament demanding the immediate opening of the India trade.
The political pressure on the government was immense.
It was.
But wait, pressure from independent merchants has existed since 1600. People always complained about the monopoly. Why did the government actually listen to Manchester and Liverpool this time, instead of just taking another bribe from the East India Company to ignore the petitions?
This is where we come to the final, fatal blow to the monopoly system, the evolution of state finance.
Always back to the money.
We have to look at what was happening in the background of 1812, the Napoleonic Wars.
The ultimate, most existential, and most expensive war of them all. Britain fighting for its life against Napoleon's empire.
Precisely. To fight Napoleon on a global scale for over a decade, the British government had to expand its fiscal capacity to unprecedented, almost unimaginable levels.
How big of an expansion?
Over the course of the Napoleonic Wars, British tax revenues exploded by 200%.
That's 100%.
And to achieve this, they had invented a radical, highly intrusive new tool to fund the war effort, the income tax.
The income tax. So they aren't just taxing trade at the physical ports anymore. They are taxing the underlying wealth and productivity of the entire nation directly.
And that completely changes the underlying economic math of the nation. Think about the incentive structure.
Okay.
In a world of low fiscal capacity like 1600, the easiest way for a state to make money is to grant one company a monopoly and take a massive rent check from them.
But in a world of high fiscal capacity, where you have a functioning income tax, efficient national customs, and a deep liquid bond market, the math flips.
Explain how it flips. Why does the state turn against the monopoly?
Well, the government finally realizes a basic, undeniable macroeconomic truth. It is far more lucrative to tax an entire free market of hundreds of competing, highly productive businesses than it is to take a single inefficient bribe from one bloated monopoly.
Exactly.
If 100 different Liverpool merchants are freely trading with India, the overall volume of trade skyrockets. More trade means more domestic manufacturing, which means higher incomes, which means massive income tax and customs revenues for the state treasury.
Lord Melville, who was the head of the Border Control regulating the company at the time, actually wrote a memo arguing this exact point.
What did he say?
He basically said to the cabinet, if private individuals can trade more efficiently and cheaper than the East India Company, it is objectively better for the nation's treasury to let them do it.
A 10% tax on a booming free market generating millions is vastly better than a flat 50,000-pound bribe from a sluggish monopoly. The state simply outgrew the need for the monopoly.
Exactly. The East India Company didn't die because it failed at business. It died because the British state became sophisticated enough to realize that free trade generated more tax revenue than crony capitalism.
So what happened in 1813?
In 1813, the Charter Act was passed by Parliament. It brutally stripped the East India Company of its monopoly and threw the India trade open to all British citizens.
The bullet that killed Spencer Perceval opened the door, and the income tax walked right through it to kill the monopoly. That is an incredible, almost cinematic sequence of historical events.
It truly is. The 1813 Act moved Britain closer to the second doorstep condition for an open society, the existence of perpetually lived organizations that do not depend on state privilege for survival.
So when any private trader from Liverpool could enter the Indian market without a royal charter, access was finally truly open.
Yes.
So what does this all mean for us today? If we pull back and synthesize this grand narrative, the story of the rise and fall of the East India Company is not really a business case study.
No, it's not.
It's not a story about how to manage global supply chains or how to innovate new consumer products. It is fundamentally the story of the evolution of state capacity.
That is the core takeaway that Dan Bogart's paper illuminates.
Britain only became a global superpower, and it only developed a true free market when its government crossed three critical thresholds.
First, establishing the rule of law for elites, meaning the king can't steal your pepper.
Second, creating perpetually lived organizations that survive beyond political election cycles.
And third, centralizing control of the military so rogue actors can't extort the system.
When a state is finally strong enough and financially secure enough through broad taxation and public bond markets, that it doesn't have to sell its laws to the highest bidder for quick cash. That is the exact moment a true free market can be born.
The free market isn't the default state of nature. The free market is a luxury of a highly capable state.
It is a profound paradox that challenges modern political rhetoric. We often think of the free market as existing in direct opposition to the state, that the market only thrives when the government gets out of the way.
But this historical analysis shows that the free market actually requires a massive, sophisticated, heavily indebted, and highly taxing state infrastructure just to protect it from devolving back into a violent mafia protection racket.
That gives me chills, and it brings me to a final, slightly chilling question to leave you, listening at home, to mull over as you go about your day.
Let's hear it.
Think about today's world. Think about today's massive tech giants, the global conglomerates, the companies whose valuations currently rival the GDP of entire sovereign nations.
Right.
Do they represent a true, invulnerable open market? Or, when you look at their massive lobbying budgets, their regulatory capture, and their deep symbiotic ties to government defense and infrastructure contracts, are they just a modern, polished version of limited access order?
It is a vital question to ask. Have we truly escaped the crony capitalism of the 17th century, or have we just given it a better PR department?
Exactly. Because the ultimate test is stress. If our global governments face a catastrophic existential debt crisis tomorrow, if the modern equivalent of the 9 Years' War breaks out, the global bond markets completely freeze, and the state suddenly needs trillions in hard cash, will the state respect the rule of law?
Or will they change the rules?
Will they forcibly extract rent from today's corporate elites, just like Charles I, sending armed men to steal warehouses full of pepper?
History might not be a simple repetition, but as they say, it always has a rhythm.
Think about the muddy, corrupt waters of the 17th century and ask yourself, how solid is the ground we actually stand on today?